The first thing I remember is the sound of Daniel Mercer laughing. Not a loud laugh. Not the kind that fills a room. The quiet, controlled kind. The kind powerful men use when they're about to end someone's career. Monday morning. 8:12 a.m. The glass conference room reflected the entire office floor, rows of desks, muted keyboards, people pretending not to look inside. Everyone knew why I had been called in. Nobody said it out loud. I'd been there 7 years. 7 years of late nights. 7 years of skipping family dinners. 7 years of building systems that turned a failing analytics department into the company's most profitable division. And now I was standing there while Daniel Mercer leaned back in his leather chair like a judge about to announce a sentence. "We're restructuring," he said. 2 words. I felt it in my chest first. That tight, hollow pressure that makes breathing feel optional. Restructuring. Corporate language for, you are no longer useful. The HR representative beside him avoided eye contact. She slid a folder across the table like it weighed 100 pounds. Effective immediately. Immediately. 7 years. Reduced to a single adverb. I kept my hand steady when I picked up the envelope. I refused to let them see them shake. I refused to give Daniel that satisfaction. "You're eliminating the division?" I asked calmly. Daniel smiled. It wasn't warmth. It was amusement. "No," he said. "We're eliminating redundancy." Redundancy. That word hit differently. Because the analytics division was mine. I built it from scratch. I trained the team. I designed the infrastructure. Every forecast model that increased quarterly revenue had my signature buried in the code. Redundant? I felt heat crawl up my neck. "I increased company margins by 28% last quarter," I said. "The supply chain optimization alone?" Daniel held up a hand. "Ethan," he said softly. "You're talented. No one's denying that." There it was. The setup before the strike. "But talent isn't ownership," he continued. "Don't confuse the two." The room went silent. And in that silence, I understood something. This wasn't about performance. This was about control. Daniel Mercer didn't like that half the executive team came to me before they came to him. He didn't like that investors requested my reports by name. He didn't like that when the company's valuation climbed, my division was the reason. He wanted obedience. Not independence. The HR rep cleared her throat and started listing severance terms, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was watching Daniel. Watching the satisfaction in his posture. Watching the way he believed this moment proved something. Proved that he was untouchable. When I stood up, he didn't. He stayed seated. A subtle move. A power move. And as I walked out carrying that envelope, I heard him say it loud enough for people outside the glass walls to hear. "Let this be a reminder. No one's irreplaceable." A reminder. Not just to me. To everyone. I packed my desk slowly. Every item I placed into that cardboard box felt heavier than it should have. The photo of my parents. The notebook filled with supply chain projections Daniel never approved. The external drive containing early versions of the predictive modeling framework I designed long before the company ever saw it. Around me, co-workers pretended to be busy. A few sent sympathetic looks. One of my analysts, Marcus, walked up quietly. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered. "Half this company runs on your systems." I forced a small smile. "Systems can be rebuilt," I said. But inside, something was shifting. Not breaking. Shifting. Humiliation does something dangerous to a person. It either crushes you, or it sharpens you. By 9:30 a.m., security escorted me out. Security. After 7 years. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of Daniel Mercer standing near the glass wall, hands in his pockets, watching. He looked satisfied. Like he had just removed a threat. The elevator hummed downward. My reflection stared back at me in the mirrored wall. Unemployed. Disrespected. Disposable. The doors opened to the lobby. And that's when the humiliation fully settled in. Not as anger. But as clarity. Because Daniel made one mistake. He believed I needed his company more than his company needed me. And that belief was going to cost him everything. I stepped outside into the cold morning air, cardboard box in hand. And instead of calling a recruiter, I pulled out my phone. I opened my contacts. And I scrolled to a name I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Marcus Hale. Investor. Visionary. Patient predator. My thumb hovered over the call button. I could walk away. Update my resume. Find another job. Start over. Or, I could do something Daniel Mercer would never expect. I pressed call. The line rang once. Twice. Then a familiar voice answered. "Ethan," Marcus said. "I was wondering when you'd finally call." I was wondering when you'd finally call. Marcus Hale's voice didn't sound surprised. It sounded prepared. I tightened my grip on the cardboard box under my arm and stepped away from the building so security wouldn't overhear. "What makes you think I'd call?" I asked. A soft chuckle came through the line. "Because men like Daniel Mercer always fire the wrong person first." I stopped walking. "You knew?" "I know CEOs," Marcus replied calmly. "Especially insecure ones." A car passed in front of me, and for a moment I watched my former office building reflected in its windows. 7 years of work behind that glass. And now I was standing on the sidewalk like a stranger. "I need capital," I said finally. There was no point pretending this was a casual check-in. "For what?" Marcus asked. "Control." Silence. Not hesitation. Evaluation. "You're not looking for another job," he said. "No. You're looking to build something." "Yes." Another pause. "And you want to hurt him." That one landed differently. Because I hadn't said it out loud yet. I exhaled slowly. "I want leverage." Marcus laughed softly. "Now we're speaking the same language." We agreed to meet that afternoon. By the time I hung up, my pulse had steadied. The humiliation from the conference room was still there, but it had transformed. It wasn't a wound anymore. It was fuel. I went home, set the cardboard box on my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. Not to update my resume. To open a spreadsheet. Daniel Mercer believed I was replaceable. But Daniel Mercer had no idea how dependent his company actually was on me. Most executives focus on revenue. I focused on infrastructure. Specifically, the supply chain bottleneck I had warned them about for 18 months. They relied on one aging logistics partner. One. If that partner faltered, the entire distribution pipeline would freeze. I had presented alternatives. More modern providers. Better forecasting integrations. Daniel shut it down every time. "Too expensive," he said. What he meant was, it would reduce his quarterly bonus. He didn't care about long-term resilience. He cared about short-term optics. And that arrogance created a weakness. I pulled up the licensing agreement for my predictive modeling framework. The code wasn't owned by the company. It was licensed. Quarterly renewal. Automatic billing. Unless manually suspended. Guess who had administrative authority over that suspension? Me. Legally. Cleanly. No hacking. No sabotage. Just contracts. My inbox pinged. A calendar invite from Marcus. For PM. Private office downtown. The rest of the afternoon, I built something Daniel would never anticipate. A projection model showing exactly how vulnerable his company was without my forecasting system. Without those dashboards, they couldn't price large bids accurately, anticipate inventory shortages, hedge supplier risk, present confident numbers to investors. Their valuation depended on projections. And those projections depended on me. At 3:45 p.m., I walked into Marcus Hale's office. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Minimalist furniture. Quiet wealth. Marcus stood when I entered. Unlike Daniel. He extended his hand. "I heard about this morning," he said. "Tough break." "Temporary," I replied. That made him smile. We sat across from each other, and I slid my laptop toward him. "I don't want revenge," I said. I did. But I needed him to hear strategy. "I want market share." Marcus studied the screen as I walked him through it. I showed him the bottleneck. The dependency ratio. The fragility of their supply chain. And then I showed him something more interesting. "There's a startup," I said, pulling up another file. Novacore Logistics. Young. Innovative. Underfunded. They had the infrastructure Daniel refused to adopt. But they lacked capital. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You want to fund Novacore. I want to own Novacore. And then?" I met his eyes. "Then I want to acquire the logistics partner Daniel depends on." Marcus's expression shifted. Not shock. Recognition. "You're not just building a competitor," he said quietly. "You're building a chokehold." I didn't respond. Because he was right. Daniel believed talent wasn't ownership. But ownership controlled the board. Ownership controlled supply. Ownership controlled survival. Marcus closed my laptop slowly. "How much do you need?" The number I gave him wasn't small. But neither was the opportunity. He didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window, hands behind his back. "When you worked at that conference in Chicago," he said, "you predicted a 12% downturn in regional logistics before anyone else saw it." "I remember. You were right." He turned around. "And Daniel took credit for that forecast, didn't he?" I didn't have to answer. Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll fund 60%, he said. "You secure the rest." "I will. But Ethan," he added carefully, "once we start this, there's no going back. You'll be declaring war." I thought about the conference room. About Daniel's smile. About the word redundancy. And about security escorting me out like I was a liability. No, I said calmly. I'll be correcting a mistake. Marcus extended his hand again. This time it wasn't sympathy. It was partnership. Then let's begin. By Wednesday morning, I had spoken to Novacore's founders. They were brilliant. Hungry. Tired of being dismissed by larger firms. They reminded me of someone. Me. When I explained the opportunity, they hesitated. Daniel Mercer will crush us, one of them said. I shook my head. Not if he doesn't see it coming. And Daniel never saw threats. He only saw subordinates. That afternoon, I logged into the licensing portal for my forecasting framework. The renewal was scheduled for Friday. I hovered over the manual review required option. One click, and the automated renewal would pause. A compliance audit would trigger. Access would temporarily suspend. Completely legal. Completely within contract. I didn't press it. Not yet. Because timing is everything. On Thursday morning, Daniel Mercer walked into his office confident. By Thursday afternoon, he was going to realize just how irreplaceable I actually was. Thursday, 8:47 a.m. Daniel Mercer walked into his office expecting control. Instead, he walked into silence. Not the normal low hum of productivity. A different kind of quiet. The kind that spreads when something is wrong and no one wants to say it first. At 9:02 a.m., the first dashboard failed to load. At 9:05, the pricing algorithm froze mid-calculation. At 9:07, the executive team chat exploded. Forecasting system down. Server issue, IT can't access backend. Who has admin override? Daniel's assistant knocked once before entering. There's a system-wide analytics outage, she said carefully. Daniel frowned. Call IT. They're already on it. Meanwhile, I was sitting at my kitchen table. Coffee untouched. Laptop open. Watching the automated notification confirmations roll in. License, pending manual review. Access, temporarily suspended. Estimated resolution, 3 to 5 business days. Perfectly within contract terms. No breach. No sabotage. Just paperwork. At 9:23 a.m., my phone rang. Daniel Mercer. I let it ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then I answered. Hello? His voice was controlled, but tight around the edges. Ethan. We're experiencing a technical issue with your forecasting framework. Not the company's framework. Not our system. Your framework. Interesting how quickly language changes when power shifts. It's not technical, I replied calmly. It's contractual. Silence. What does that mean? He asked. It means the quarterly license entered manual review. You didn't notify us. It's outlined in section 4.2 of the agreement. He didn't like that. I could hear it in the way he exhaled through his nose. We need immediate reinstatement, he said. Need. Another interesting shift. Of course, I replied evenly. We can discuss renewal terms. Renewal terms? His voice sharpened. We've always paid the same rate. Yes, I said. Under previous circumstances. And there it was. The unspoken acknowledgement. Previous circumstances included me being an employee. Disposable. Redundant. Now I was a vendor. Independent. Essential. What are you asking for? Daniel said finally. I leaned back in my chair. Not smiling. Not gloating. Just steady. Majority equity stake in your analytics division. Full autonomy. And a 5-year strategic partnership contract. Silence again. Longer this time. You're out of your mind, he said quietly. No, I replied. I'm negotiating. His voice dropped lower. You think this is leverage? I didn't answer. Because we both knew it was. Without that forecasting system, their pricing models were guesses. Their bids were blind. Their investor call scheduled for Friday afternoon would be a disaster. You have until noon, I said calmly. After that, the review process continues. I ended the call before he could respond. For the first time since Monday morning, I felt still. Not angry. Not anxious. Still. By 10:15 a.m., Novacore's founders were on a secured video call with me and Marcus Hale. We're ready, one of them said. Marcus nodded. Funding documents are finalized. Ownership stake, 62%. Controlling interest. Mine. Daniel was fighting a fire he didn't understand. Because while he scrambled to restore forecasting access, we were closing acquisition terms on the very infrastructure he had refused to modernize. At 11:48 a.m., Daniel called again. His tone was different now. Less authority. More calculation. We're willing to increase the licensing fee, he said. Significantly. Money. That's what he thought this was about. This isn't about money, I said quietly. What is it about then? He snapped. Respect, I thought. Control. Balance. But what I said was simpler. Stability. You're threatening company stability. No, I replied. Your decisions did that. His breathing grew heavier. You're making a mistake. No, I said. I'm correcting one. At exactly noon, I didn't extend the review window. I didn't rush anything either. I let the system operate on its normal compliance timeline. 3 to 5 business days. By Thursday afternoon, their internal panic became external. An emergency board meeting was called. Stock analysts noticed unusual volatility. Investors started asking questions. And Daniel Mercer, for the first time in his career, didn't have numbers to hide behind. Meanwhile, at 3:30 p.m., Marcus finalized Novacore's capital injection. By 5 p.m., we began negotiations to acquire Titan Freight. Titan Freight. Daniel's single-point supply chain dependency. The company he refused to replace. The weak link in his entire empire. He still thought this was about a dashboard. He had no idea? It was about oxygen. And we were about to control the air. Thursday night, I didn't celebrate. I reviewed contracts. Double-checked clauses. Ensured everything was clean. Legal. Strategic. Because revenge that breaks laws is messy. Revenge that uses contracts? Is permanent. Friday morning would be his investor call. Without projections. Without supply guarantees. Without leverage. And by Friday afternoon, Daniel Mercer was going to realize something terrifying. He hadn't fired a redundant employee. He had fired the architect. Friday. 1:55 p.m. Daniel Mercer adjusted his tie for the third time in 10 minutes. The investor call was scheduled for 2 p.m. Normally, this was his stage. He loved these calls. Loved the polished confidence. Loved quoting growth percentages like they were personal achievements. But today? Today he had no numbers. Because the forecasting system still showed. Access suspended, license under review. At 1:58 p.m., his CFO leaned toward him. We can postpone, she whispered. Daniel shook his head. No. We control the narrative. That was his philosophy. Control the narrative. Even if the foundation underneath it was cracking. Meanwhile, I was in Marcus Hale's office, watching Titan Freight's executive team sign preliminary acquisition documents. They didn't know Daniel's company was spiraling. They just knew they were about to receive a generous buyout offer from Novacore Holdings. Which, as of 9:12 a.m. that morning, I officially controlled. Marcus slid the finalized document across the table toward me. Congratulations, he said calmly. On? You now own the fastest-growing logistics infrastructure in the region. Ownership. That word again. The same word Daniel used to diminish me. Talent isn't ownership. But now? Ownership was talent. 2 p.m. Daniel's voice echoed through speakerphones across investor offices. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. His tone was steady. Too steady. The kind of steady that cracks if you press it. He opened with generic metrics. Revenue from last quarter. Growth targets. Market positioning. But when the first analyst asked, can you walk us through forward projections for Q4? There it was. The silence. A brief one. But noticeable. We're currently finalizing updated modeling, Daniel said smoothly. Finalizing. Translation, we don't have it. Another analyst jumped in. There are reports of system disruptions internally. Can you confirm operational stability? Daniel's jaw tightened. We are addressing minor technical reviews. No impact to long-term performance. Minor. Technical. Review. He stacked euphemisms like shields. But investors don't care about language. They care about certainty. And Daniel had none. By 2:47 p.m., the call ended. By 3:02 p.m., the first stock dip alert triggered. -6%. By 3:15 p.m., it hit 11%. By 3:40 p.m., financial blogs were asking questions. Leadership transparency concerns? Operational risk exposure? Daniel's assistant called him into a private office. The board wanted an emergency session at 5 p.m. Meanwhile, at 4:10 p.m., Titan Freight's acquisition was finalized. Signed. Sealed. Public announcement scheduled for Monday morning. Daniel still believed this was about a license renewal. He still thought restoring the dashboard would fix everything. He didn't know the oxygen supply was about to reroute. At 4:32 p.m., my phone rang again. Daniel. I answered. His voice was stripped of performance now. What do you want? He asked. Not aggressive. Not mocking. Just raw. I told you, I said. Stability. You're destabilizing the company. No, I replied calmly. I'm exposing how unstable it already was. You think this ends well for you, he said quietly. I stood up and walked toward Marcus's office window, looking down at the city. It already has, I said. You need us, he insisted. I almost laughed. No, I said. You needed me. Silence. Then something new in his tone. Fear. What have you done? He asked. Perfect timing. Marcus stepped into the room and handed me his tablet. A draft press release. Novacore Holdings acquires Titan Freight Logistics. I read the headline silently. Then I spoke. We've secured alternative infrastructure. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Because he understood. If Novacore controlled Titan Freight, and Novacore had modern predictive infrastructure, and Daniel's company was mid-crisis, then suppliers would shift. Investors would shift. Clients would shift. Momentum is everything in business. And momentum had just changed direction. You're bluffing, Daniel said finally. I'm not. I emailed him the public filing confirmation while we were still on the call. 10 seconds later, I heard his breathing change. He wasn't speaking anymore. He was reading. You can't, he started. It's done, I said. You're making this personal. I thought about Monday morning. About security escorting me out. About the word redundant. You made it personal, I replied. He hung up without another word. At 5 p.m., Daniel walked into the emergency board meeting without forecasts, without supply security, and without leverage. By 6:20 p.m., Titan Freight's leadership had already begun transitioning priority contracts toward Novacore. By 7 p.m., 3 of Daniel's largest clients requested contingency meetings. And I didn't celebrate. I sat quietly in Marcus's office as the city lights flickered on outside. Because this wasn't about celebration. It was about inevitability. Daniel Mercer believed power came from position. He believed titles protected him. He believed ownership was permanent. But ownership shifts. Power shifts. And the moment you underestimate the person building your foundation, you risk losing the entire structure. Monday, I carried a cardboard box out of his building. Friday night, I controlled the supply line feeding it. And Daniel Mercer was about to learn something far more terrifying than system failure. He was about to learn what it feels like to be replaceable. Monday, 6:30 a.m. Exactly 1 week after I walked out carrying that cardboard box. The press release went live. Novacore Holdings acquires Titan Freight Logistics in strategic expansion move. The headline spread faster than I expected. By 7:15 a.m., industry blogs were dissecting it. By 8 a.m., financial news outlets were speculating. By 8:32 a.m., Daniel Mercer was walking into chaos. Because Titan Freight wasn't just a vendor. It was the backbone of his distribution network. Without it, delivery stalled. Without it, contracts delayed. Without it, confidence evaporated. At 9:05 a.m., Novacore's executive inbox received 3 meeting requests. All from Daniel's largest clients. Not cancellations. Conversations. And in business, conversations during instability mean migration. I was in the Novacore boardroom when the first call came in. Marcus looked at me. You want to take it? He asked. I nodded. The client's voice was cautious. We just want reassurance, he said. We've worked with Daniel's company for years. I didn't attack. I didn't gloat. I did something far more effective. I presented numbers. Supply redundancy percentages. Improved fulfillment projections. Risk mitigation strategies. Stability. The exact thing Daniel failed to provide on Friday. When the call ended, Marcus leaned back in his chair. You're not destroying him, he said quietly. You're absorbing him. That word lingered. Absorbing. Because that's what this was turning into. Not revenge fueled by emotion. But strategy fueled by weakness. At 10:14 a.m., Daniel finally called. His voice was no longer sharp. It was strained. You blindsided us, he said. No, I replied calmly. I warned you 18 months ago about supply dependency. This isn't about supply, he snapped. You're right, I said. It's about arrogance. He exhaled heavily. What do you want now? Now. Interesting. Because a week ago, I was asking him that. I want a meeting, I said. Neutral location. There was a pause. Then a quiet. Fine. We agreed to meet Wednesday at a regional tech summit. Public setting. Industry executives everywhere. Exactly where reputations are visible. When the call ended, I felt something unexpected. Not anger. Not triumph. Closure beginning to form. But it wasn't finished yet. By Tuesday afternoon, Daniel's stock had dropped 23% from its pre-Friday value. Internal leaks started surfacing. Anonymous reports of leadership instability. Board members distancing themselves. And then came the real fracture. One of Daniel's senior executives reached out to Marcus directly. Off the record. They're considering a leadership review, Marcus told me later that evening. Leadership review. Corporate language for preparing the exit. Daniel Mercer built his identity around control. And control was slipping through his fingers. Wednesday arrived. The summit venue buzzed with investors, founders, press, and competitors. I adjusted my tailored suit jacket before walking inside. No cardboard box this time. No security escort. Just quiet certainty. Novacore's booth stood near the center of the expo floor. Clean branding. Modern infrastructure displays. Confident messaging. Marcus stood beside me as attendees filtered through. Then I saw him. Daniel Mercer. He looked tired. Still polished. Still composed. But the confidence had hairline cracks now. He approached slowly. Industry peers watched. Because everyone knew something was happening. Marcus greeted him first. Daniel, he said smoothly. Good to see you. Daniel forced a tight smile. Then his eyes shifted to me. Recognition. Resentment. Disbelief. You moved quickly, he said. You hesitated, I replied evenly. We stepped slightly aside, though still visible to the room. What's your endgame? He asked quietly. Growth. You're enjoying this, he accused. I held his gaze. No, I said calmly. I'm correcting it. Correcting what? The mistake you made Monday morning. His jaw tightened. You think you've won? I leaned slightly closer. You fired the architect, I said softly. And now you're asking the blueprint for help. His expression flickered. Because deep down, he knew it was true. Investors began drifting closer. Whispers forming. Daniel's posture stiffened. He hated losing face in public. I'm prepared to negotiate, he said carefully. There it was. The shift. Not dominance. Negotiation. You should have thought about negotiation before you escorted me out with security, I replied. His eyes darkened. You're making this personal. No, I said. You did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Marcus stepped forward. Daniel, he said evenly, have you met Novacore's majority shareholder? And just like that, the dynamic flipped. Daniel looked at Marcus. Then back at me. Majority, he repeated. I extended my hand. The same way he hadn't stood for me a week ago. Ownership. Control. Leverage. All visible. You underestimated the wrong person, I said quietly. He didn't take my hand immediately. And in that hesitation, everyone watching understood. Power had shifted. Daniel Mercer stared at my hand for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds doesn't sound long. But in a room filled with investors, founders, and executives, it feels like an eternity. Finally, he took it. His grip was firm. Too firm. A silent attempt to reclaim dominance. But power isn't in pressure. It's in position. And my position had changed. Congratulations, he said through a thin smile. Thank you, I replied evenly. Around us, cameras flashed. Not major media, just industry bloggers and startup journalists. But perception travels fast. And perception becomes reality in business. Daniel released my hand first. A small detail. But I noticed. I'd like a private conversation, he said. Of course, I replied. We stepped into a quieter lounge area near the back of the venue. Glass walls again. Funny how life mirrors moments. He turned to face me once we were alone. This has gone far enough, he said. I tilted my head slightly. Has it? You've made your point. No, I said calmly. I've made progress. His jaw tightened. You destabilized my company. I exposed its fragility. You exploited a temporary licensing review. I enforced a contract. Every sentence he threw felt weaker than the last. Because deep down, he knew none of this was illegal. None of it was sabotage. It was strategy. You think the board won't fight back? He asked quietly. They already are, I replied. His eyes flickered. He didn't expect that. 2 of your board members reached out to Marcus yesterday, I continued. They're concerned. Concerned. Another corporate euphemism. For doubt. You're bluffing, he said. I pulled out my phone and opened an email thread. Names visible. Timestamps clear. I didn't hand him the phone. I just let him see enough. The color drained slightly from his face. Because now it wasn't just a supply issue. It was confidence erosion. And confidence is everything. What do you want? He asked again. But this time it wasn't aggressive. It wasn't defensive. It was almost tired. I studied him for a moment. The man who laughed while firing me. The man who said talent wasn't ownership. The man who believed control was permanent. I want your analytics division, I said quietly. Full acquisition. Clean transfer. His head snapped back slightly. That division is the heart of our valuation. I know, I replied. You built it. I know. Silence filled the space between us. He understood the irony. He fired the person who built the heart. Now the heart was leaving. You're gutting us, he said. No, I corrected him. I'm taking back what I built. His breathing grew heavier. You're asking me to dismantle my own company. No, I said calmly. I'm asking you to accept reality. Outside the glass walls, the summit buzzed with energy. But inside, it felt like everything had slowed. If I refuse, he asked. I met his eyes. Then Titan Freight prioritizes Novacore contracts permanently. Your top clients migrate within 60 days. And your board accelerates the leadership review. He didn't speak. Because he knew it was plausible. Momentum was already shifting. This wasn't a threat. It was trajectory. You're enjoying this, he muttered again. I shook my head slowly. You embarrassed me publicly, I said quietly. You escorted me out like I was a liability. You called me redundant. His eyes shifted slightly. Maybe regret. Maybe calculation. But I didn't destroy you, I continued. I just gave the market a better option. That landed harder than any insult. Because it was true. Business isn't about revenge. It's about alternatives. And I had become the better alternative. A notification buzzed on his phone. He glanced down. I watched the exact moment his expression changed. The board had called an emergency vote. Effective immediately. Interim leadership discussion. He locked his phone screen slowly. They moved faster than I expected, I said quietly. He looked at me differently now. Not as a subordinate. Not as an enemy. As a consequence. You set this up, he said. No, I replied. You did. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, something surprising happened. His shoulders lowered slightly. The fight drained. You were the best asset this company had, he said quietly. Was that an apology? Not quite. But it was the closest he would ever come. And you treated me like overhead, I replied. Silence again. If I agree to sell the analytics division, he said slowly, what happens to me? There it was. The real question. Not about contracts. Not about valuation. About identity. I thought about Monday morning. About humiliation turning into clarity. You transition out with dignity, I said. Publicly. Strategically. And privately? You learn. His lips pressed into a thin line. You always were ambitious, he said. No, I replied calmly. I was always building. Outside, applause erupted from the main stage of the summit. Some keynote speaker finishing a presentation about innovation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Innovation doesn't die because of competitors. It dies because of ego. Daniel looked at me one last time. If I sign, he said, this becomes your legacy. It already is, I replied. He nodded slowly. Defeat doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like acceptance. Send the documents, he said quietly. And just like that, the man who fired me on Monday was preparing to sell me the division I built. Ownership had shifted. Control had shifted. Power had shifted. But this wasn't the end. Because in business, acquisition is only the beginning. And Daniel Mercer still had one final decision to make. Thursday. 7:02 a.m. The city was just waking up, and so was the storm I'd set in motion. Daniel Mercer didn't know it yet, but his recovery would be slower than he imagined. The analytics division had been transferred to Novacore, yes, but the dominoes were only beginning to fall. I sat at my desk, reviewing the new supply schedules, the predictive dashboards, and the Titan Freight integration plan. Every detail mattered. Every minor adjustment was leverage. A notification blinked on my phone. Daniel's executive team had sent an internal alert, panic understated by corporate phrasing, but panic nonetheless. Operational continuity risk identified. Escalate immediately. I smiled. They didn't realize the alert itself was evidence of a failing structure. Their investors would see it. Analysts would see it. Daniel had set them up to notice exactly how dependent his empire was on me. By 8:15 a.m., emails poured in. Senior clients requesting contingency calls, suppliers questioning schedules, and one quiet message from a board member, do you have a direct line? Yes. I had a direct line. The one Daniel never imagined existed outside his own chain of command. I replied succinctly, yes. Let's discuss stability options. Meanwhile, Daniel arrived at the office. The building was the same, but the energy had shifted. Executives greeted me politely, yet nervously. The whispered conversations and sideways glances were unmistakable. The man who had dismissed me as redundant now had to navigate a minefield I had planted while he slept. At 9:02 a.m., his assistant knocked softly, Mr. Mercer, you have a call from Marcus Hale. He took it, a forced composure in his posture. Marcus's voice came calm and measured, morning, Daniel. We need to discuss the terms for a transition, and the next steps for Novacore's integration with Titan Freight. Daniel's grip tightened around the phone. "Yes," he said. "Let's talk." And that's when I made the next move. I didn't call him. I didn't email him. I sent a simple calendar invite labeled Operational Review, Priority, Confidential. He accepted it immediately, assuming it was routine. By 10:30 a.m., we were seated in a boardroom where Daniel's authority was intact only by title. The reality of the shift was clear. His team looked to me first, checking for guidance, verification, reassurance. I gave neither. Instead, I outlined the integration plan, step by step. Every choice highlighted vulnerabilities in his current operations, every pause a subtle reminder: if he acted hastily, he would lose more than reputation. Daniel's eyes flicked toward the tablet. He knew, and he hated knowing, that he had underestimated me. Again. The clock ticked. Tension thickened. Analysts, suppliers, and board members outside this room were already sensing the shift. Each decision I presented gave Novacore leverage. Each hesitation on his part widened the gap. By 11:15 a.m., I could see it. The man who fired me Monday morning was beginning to calculate, not retaliation, but survival. And that was exactly where I wanted him. The first domino had fallen. Thursday. 11:47 a.m. Daniel Mercer sat back in his chair, rubbing his temple. The boardroom had grown silent. Not from decorum, but from realization. Every executive present understood that the dynamics had shifted without fanfare. They looked at him for leadership. But the answers came from me. He leaned forward, voice low. "Ethan, what exactly are you doing?" I let a small pause linger. Suspense is a tool as powerful as contracts. "I'm ensuring stability," I said quietly. "You called me redundant. You ignored my warnings. Now, the market is watching." His eyes narrowed. "You're manipulating perception." "No," I replied. "I'm presenting facts." A subtle smirk tugged at his lips, the kind of smirk that betrays anger mixed with fear. He knew I was right. He had no defenses that didn't already exist. At that moment, an email pinged on the room's shared tablet. Daniel leaned over to see it. A client, one of his top 3, had requested a private meeting with me before confirming any contracts for the next quarter. He stiffened. "You're cutting into my relationships." "I'm reallocating attention to where it matters," I said. "Simple. Clean. Surgical." The board murmured. Every subtle gesture, every carefully timed pause, reinforced my control. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need theatrics. Control is quiet, methodical, almost invisible. Until it isn't. Daniel's breathing grew heavier. The man who once fired me with a smile was now calculating survival strategies. But every move he considered came with a price. Every decision had a cost I had structured long before he ever thought to resist. I leaned back, letting the tension build. "You underestimated leverage, Daniel," I said. "Now you're seeing it firsthand." He stood abruptly, pacing behind his chair. "If I counter this, if I push back, you'll be too slow," I said. "Timing matters. And I control the timing." A brief silence followed. His gaze shifted toward the window overlooking the city skyline. His mind raced, trying to find a loophole, a strategy, a way to reclaim dominance. But every potential path led to concessions he wasn't prepared to make. He spun back toward me. "You're making enemies," he said sharply. I shook my head. "I'm clarifying loyalties. That's different." By 12:30 p.m., subtle communications were already reaching external partners. The shift was imperceptible to outsiders, yet crystal clear to anyone watching the market closely. The real power wasn't in confrontation. It was in perception, and perception had already moved. Daniel Mercer, the man who had laughed as he fired me on Monday, now found himself navigating a boardroom that no longer obeyed his directives. Each hesitant glance, each internal conflict among his team, each client communication I influenced quietly chipped away at his authority. And in the back of my mind, I prepared the next move. The move Daniel would never anticipate. The move that would turn control into inevitability. Because by Friday, the real reckoning would begin. Thursday. 3:15 p.m. The first domino finally fell. A supplier, one Daniel had relied on for over a decade, sent a discreet message to my inbox. "Due to shifting priorities, we're temporarily redirecting shipments through Novacore channels. Please advise on scheduling." I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I watched Daniel's reaction unfold in real time. A text arrived on my phone. "Ethan, what did you do?" "Perfect. Exactly what I wanted." I sent a calm, single-line response, just ensuring stability. In the boardroom, Daniel's assistant leaned in, whispering, "They're rerouting deliveries. Some key clients are asking for confirmation of new logistics." He froze. A man who thrived on control, now powerless to instantly reverse what had been set in motion. I could see it in his posture, the rigid shoulders, the tight jaw, the subtle tremor in his hands. Control, once his armor, was now a cage. Every glance he cast toward me measured threat, leverage, survival. "Why?" he finally said aloud, voice tight. "Because you fired me," I said evenly. "Because you treated foresight as redundancy. Because you confused loyalty with convenience." He turned sharply, gripping the edge of the table. "This isn't over." I smiled faintly. "It is, for now." Outside, the city's hum continued as if nothing had changed. Inside, a quiet war raged. Every decision, every misstep, every delayed reaction was now magnified under the spotlight of consequence. By 4 p.m., whispers from the office floor filtered up, clients confirming Novacore as the preferred partner, suppliers redirecting, analysts noticing subtle operational advantages. The tide had begun to turn. Daniel moved between calls, his voice measured but strained, trying to reassert authority. Each call ended with uncertainty, hesitation, or subtle concessions, none of which restored control. Every minute, the reality sank deeper. He wasn't just losing leverage. He was losing the narrative. I leaned back in my chair, watching, waiting. A calculated observer. The architect of the shift, invisible until it was undeniable. This was more than revenge. This was correction, quiet, methodical, unstoppable. And by Friday, the next wave would hit. The one that would force Daniel Mercer to confront the ultimate consequences of underestimating the person he dismissed. Thursday. 5:18 p.m. Daniel Mercer was pacing. The boardroom, once a place where his voice commanded the room, now echoed with hesitation. His team looked to him, but their eyes betrayed doubt. His fingers tapped rapidly on the table, a silent rhythm of panic he refused to admit. The phone rang constantly. Clients requesting clarification. Suppliers double-checking schedules. Analysts probing for signs of disruption. Every call a reminder that control was no longer his. He stopped suddenly, gripping the edge of the conference table. How did you get them aligned?" he muttered under his breath. I walked into the room silently, standing behind the glass wall, observing him like a chess player watching an opponent fumble the endgame. "You built this on trust," I said calmly. "I built it on leverage." He spun around, jaw tight. "Leverage, that's not business. That's manipulation." I shrugged. "Perception is everything. Timing is everything. And you taught me exactly how to use both." Daniel's eyes narrowed. He had the knowledge of his empire, but not the ability to enforce it anymore. Each pause, each misstep, each hesitation on his part was now mine to exploit. By 5:45 p.m., subtle moves began cascading. Novacore's team began redirecting high-priority shipments. Key clients, previously loyal to Daniel, sent confirmation emails to me, not him. His internal memos were being ignored or overridden by operational teams now reporting indirectly to Novacore. He muttered again. "This isn't fair." I leaned forward. "Fair? You think fairness runs in the market? It doesn't. Strategy does. Foresight does. And you underestimated me." The room fell silent. Not because of decorum, but because the truth hit every executive present. The man who fired the architect was now scrambling to save what he couldn't rebuild overnight. By 6:30 p.m., Daniel realized that attempting to counteract now would only make things worse. Every aggressive move he made was anticipated, every minor concession already leveraged. The system I'd built wasn't just operational, it was psychological. And in this game, anticipation wins. I walked out of the room slowly, allowing him to watch every step. Not a taunt. Not a victory lap. Just presence. Control is not always loud, often it's quiet, invisible, and undeniable. He slumped into the chair, staring at the tablet on the table, the same one that held projections he now couldn't influence. "Ethan," he whispered, almost to himself. "You've cornered me." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The realization had already taken root. Outside the window, the city lights reflected across the glass. A week ago, Daniel Mercer believed he had fired a redundant employee. Now, he understood, he had created the architect of his own inevitable shift. And Friday? Friday would make him see just how irreversible that shift truly was. Friday. 8:03 a.m. The first strike hit silently, like a needle piercing a balloon. Daniel Mercer walked into his office, expecting routine. Instead, he found subtle chaos, emails marked urgent, operations flagged for review, and subtle shifts in client priorities already underway. The analytics division he had underestimated was now moving faster, smarter, and without him. A supplier's notification popped up on his dashboard, priority routes redirected through Novacore channels. Immediate acknowledgement required. Daniel's jaw tightened. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Panic wasn't loud, but it was visible. By 9:15 a.m., 3 of his largest clients requested emergency calls, clients who had been loyal for over a decade. Requests that, in any previous week, would have required his personal attention. Now, they were consulting with Novacore's team first. I watched from the operations center, silent, observing the ripple effect I had engineered. Each decision, each subtle adjustment, each forward-planning email, all coordinated to maximize leverage. Not chaos for its own sake, but inevitability. Daniel's phone buzzed repeatedly. Calls, texts, urgent messages. Each one a reminder, the architecture he dismissed was now controlling the flow. He finally picked up a call from a top client. "Daniel, we need confirmation of shipment schedules." He hesitated. Stammered. Recalculated. Yes, we can confirm." The client's tone was polite but firm. "We've already received confirmation from Novacore. They're providing priority access." A short pause. Daniel swallowed. His internal panic was silent but palpable. By 10 a.m., analysts on the financial blogs were noticing subtle operational shifts. Headlines quietly updated: Novacore takes lead in regional logistics, Titan freight integration ongoing. Daniel flinched. Momentum, the thing he had counted on for stability, was now slipping through his fingers. I received a notification. One of his board members had reached out directly to Marcus. "We need guidance," the message read. "Daniel's decisions are inconsistent, and we need oversight." By 11:45 a.m., the internal staff began questioning directives. Subtle murmurs, small deviations from orders, hesitations, each tiny act a fracture in his authority. Daniel sat back, chest tight, eyes scanning the room. For the first time, he understood exactly what it felt like to be replaceable. And the quietest part of it all, the most devastating, was that I hadn't lifted a finger against him directly. I had simply activated a network of systems, relationships, and leverage he had ignored. The consequences unfolded naturally, like dominoes perfectly aligned. He looked at his phone again. My last message from Thursday night glowed faintly on the screen. "Friday is yours to learn. Don't waste it." He exhaled sharply. The fight drained from him, not yet defeated, but painfully aware that the next few hours would define his legacy. And I sat back in the operations center, watching the first dominoes continue to fall, knowing the next moves would leave him scrambling completely, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Part 13, clean copy-paste, no ending, continuation. Friday. 1:02 p.m. The first major collapse hit quietly but with devastating precision. Daniel Mercer's flagship distribution hub, his pride and the supposed linchpin of Titan freight reliability, was now partially under Novacore's operational oversight. A minor scheduling adjustment, invisible to the public eye, caused a cascade of delays in 3 key client shipments. The phones rang off the hook. The office staff scrambled. Managers tried to patch the gaps, but the plan I had quietly engineered accounted for every contingency. Every emergency Daniel tried to fix had already been anticipated. He slammed his fist on the table. "This isn't happening." It was happening. Emails from clients poured in. Not angry, not accusing. Calm, professional, but shifting priorities subtly toward Novacore. The operational momentum had silently shifted, and the market was noticing. One of his senior executives approached cautiously. "Daniel, the clients, they're asking for confirmations from Novacore first. We can't, it's escalating." Daniel's breathing grew heavy. He realized the truth: he had been outmaneuvered without a single public confrontation. The system he had ignored, the employee he dismissed, had quietly taken the initiative, and every domino he touched now fell against him. By 2:30 p.m., whispers spread among the board. Investor calls were coming in, asking about leadership stability and operational control. The board, previously loyal, now hesitated, sensing the shift before Daniel could address it. He stood abruptly, pacing, muttering to himself. Every step, every gesture revealed tension, frustration, and disbelief. He had fired the architect, dismissed foresight as redundancy, and now faced the consequences of ignoring leverage, strategy, and subtle influence. I monitored it all silently, watching the pieces fall like a perfect domino chain. Each minor failure amplified the psychological weight on Daniel. His empire wasn't collapsing in a blaze of chaos, it was quietly crumbling under its own weaknesses, exposed by someone he underestimated. By 3:15 p.m., Daniel Mercer understood the magnitude. His empire was still intact, but control was no longer his. The illusion of authority remained only because appearances had to be maintained. Every internal communication, every operational adjustment, every subtle decision now required calculation. Would it strengthen him or further shift the balance toward me? And he realized, deep down, that for the first time, he was no longer in the driver's seat. He was reacting. Every move, every decision, every word was defensive. A notification lit up my phone, a private message from Marcus. Ready for the next phase? I smiled. The next wave was already set. By evening, Daniel would face decisions that would challenge his pride, his ego, and his ability to control even the most basic aspects of his company. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Friday. 4:08 p.m. Daniel Mercer's desperation became palpable. He called his top managers into the conference room. The usual air of confidence was gone, replaced by terse glances, short tempers, and an unspoken tension. He tried to assert authority, but every instruction was met with hesitation, employees instinctively double-checking with NovaCore protocols. You will reroute all priority shipments back to Titan Freight immediately. Daniel barked, pounding the table. A young operations manager hesitated. Sir, the system now automatically prioritizes NovaCore channels for these accounts. Reversing it will cause delays, and some clients have already acknowledged the updated schedule. Daniel froze. That hesitation was poison. For the first time, he realized his empire didn't run on fear or loyalty, it ran on trust. And that trust had quietly shifted. He tried again. Override it. Immediately. The manager shook his head subtly. It's not just a system change. The board is already aware, and clients are monitoring the progress. Any abrupt override could jeopardize multiple contracts. Daniel's face flushed. He had assumed control was a lever, push here, pull there. But control wasn't a switch anymore. It was fragile, shifting, and I had placed my hands firmly on the fulcrum. By 5 p.m., subtle leaks began surfacing to the media, analyst reports noting slight operational shifts, market whispers about Titan Freight integration, hints that NovaCore's influence was growing. Daniel's panic intensified with every passing minute. Each piece of news eroded credibility he had once taken for granted. He paced the room, muttering calculations, rechecking every email, every communication, every schedule. Yet, with every move he made, he realized it wasn't enough. Every reaction I had anticipated days ago. Every countermeasure carefully planned. By 5:45 p.m., the board called an emergency session. Daniel's phone rang with messages marked urgent, investors asking pointed questions about operational stability, client retention, and leadership strategy. The very structure he had relied on for confidence now questioned him. I watched quietly from a distance, every domino falling perfectly into place. Daniel's reputation, his authority, and his control were slipping, quietly but inexorably. The man who had laughed while firing me now faced the subtle but undeniable consequences of underestimating me. He glanced at the clock. 6 p.m. The official end of the business week. He understood the reality. By Monday morning, the world would see the first irreversible consequences. And Daniel Mercer would have nowhere left to reclaim dominance. The final act was near, but I wasn't finished yet. The next wave would break, and by then, even pride would bend before inevitability. Friday. 7:30 p.m. The first signs of public humiliation hit subtly, but painfully. Daniel Mercer opened his email to find a carefully drafted internal newsletter circulating among employees. Not aggressive. Not accusatory. Just facts. Operational shifts. Strategic adjustments. Key achievements highlighted. And at the center of it all, NovaCore's integration and my leadership of the analytics division. He scrolled through, eyes narrowing. Employees were congratulating the new team structure, sending messages of support to me, quiet but unmistakable. Daniel's pride burned silently. He realized the acknowledgement he craved was no longer his to command. He picked up the phone, calling his PR manager. Why are my employees praising him? Sir, they're excited about operational improvements, the manager said carefully. They respect the leadership decisions being implemented. Respect, he muttered. It should be me. By 8 p.m., whispers from industry contacts began filtering in. Analysts had noticed operational stability in NovaCore's favor. Subtle commentary appeared online. NovaCore's rapid response demonstrates effective foresight and leadership. Daniel froze. Reputation, what he had built over decades, was quietly shifting in real time. The world wasn't seeing chaos. They were seeing competence. Not his, mine. By 8:30 p.m., the final humiliation began. A top client, previously loyal to Titan Freight, sent an official note requesting a strategic planning session with NovaCore leadership. The email included Marcus in CC, and implicitly, me. Daniel's assistant stared at him, uncertain. They want him involved directly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Pride, frustration, and disbelief battled silently in his chest. He had fired me, underestimated me, dismissed me, and now, he was watching me take control without confrontation, without aggression, without even raising my voice publicly. I sat back in my office, reading the forwarded emails, each confirmation and acknowledgement a calculated domino falling into place. The public perception, the internal authority, the operational command, all aligning exactly as I had planned. By 9 p.m., Daniel Mercer understood a simple truth: his laughter on Monday had been the sound of underestimation. And by Friday evening, that underestimation had turned into an invisible, undeniable humiliation. The week's battle wasn't over, but the first cracks in his armor were permanent. And I was ready for the next wave, quiet, precise, and inevitable. Friday, 10:12 p.m. The night was quiet outside, but inside the city's high-rise offices, Daniel Mercer's world was unraveling. His phone buzzed constantly, messages from investors, clients, and board members. Each one contained subtle pressure, veiled concerns, and questions he had no immediate answers to. The weight of underestimation pressed down on him harder than any financial loss. I reviewed the latest operational reports from Novacor. Every shipment, every client confirmation, every internal adjustment flowed exactly as I had planned. The beauty of this phase wasn't chaos, it was inevitability. A ping. Another client requesting an urgent strategy session. Another internal team asking for my approval on decisions Daniel had previously considered unquestionable. The man who fired me on Monday now found himself reacting to the very employee he had dismissed. Daniel slammed his palm on the desk. This isn't happening. It can't be. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The dominoes had started falling long before he realized the gravity of each one. Every hesitant step, every second of delay, only magnified the consequences I had already set in motion. By 11 p.m., subtle tremors of panic had spread through his management team. Hesitation, whispered doubts, and quiet uncertainty had replaced the usual confidence. Each minor misstep amplified the psychological weight crushing Daniel's pride. He sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. How did you do this?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. I watched quietly, knowing the next hours would cement the final understanding: power isn't taken with anger or aggression. Power is built through foresight, leverage, and the patience to wait until inevitability aligns with action. And Friday night was far from over. The final moves were still coming. The dominoes I had aligned since Monday were ready to tumble completely, leaving Daniel Mercer with nothing but the stark truth: he had misjudged the person he dismissed, and the cost of that mistake was about to become unavoidable. Friday, 11:23 p.m. The first irreversible consequences hit silently, but with devastating clarity. Daniel Mercer received a call from the board chair. The tone was polite, but the subtext was unmistakable: we need to discuss the stability of Titan Freight's leadership before Monday morning. He froze. His authority, carefully cultivated over decades, was now under quiet review. Every hesitation, every misstep, every delayed response had been recorded. The dominoes I had aligned weren't just operational, they were psychological, corporate, and personal. He ended the call, exhaling sharply. His team waited for direction, but he had none. Every instinct screamed that any rash decision would worsen the situation. But the weight of inaction carried its own cost. Meanwhile, I monitored communications from Novacor. Every client, every supplier, every internal team, already aligned, already cooperative. My network of leverage had been fully activated. Each subtle shift I had engineered over the week had now reached the point of inevitability. Daniel glanced at the tablet on his desk, the analytics dashboard. Metrics he had once controlled now reflected my influence. Orders confirmed through Novacor channels. Operational efficiency rising, not under his command, but under the authority of the employee he had dismissed. He muttered to himself, "This can't be happening. I fired him. I made the decisions. I'm in control." But control is fragile. It isn't won through ego or fear. It is built through foresight, patience, and timing. And he had underestimated every element of mine. By midnight, subtle whispers reached the executive floor. "Did you see the client confirmation? Novacor's proposal was approved ahead of Titan Freight's. They are moving faster than expected." Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through messages. His empire, solid, formidable, and unyielding just a week ago, was shifting under his eyes. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. And in that quiet moment, I realized something: revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it builds, patiently, quietly, invisibly, until the world finally notices that nothing will ever be the same. Friday night was far from over. The next hours would bring decisions that would define Daniel Mercer's career, his pride, and his understanding of what happens when someone underestimated you completely. Saturday, 8:07 a.m. Daniel Mercer walked into the office, exhausted, tense, and pale. The week had been brutal, but nothing had prepared him for what awaited. The operational chaos he had feared was no longer hypothetical, it was concrete. Every client had confirmed meetings with Novacore leadership. Every supplier had shifted priority channels. The analytics dashboard displayed metrics he could no longer influence. His team glanced at him with subtle hesitation, a quiet acknowledgement that authority had quietly shifted. He slammed his palm on the desk, a futile gesture. This isn't happening. I entered calmly, without fanfare, standing just behind him. My presence wasn't loud, but it carried weight. He turned, eyes wide, realizing the employee he had dismissed now commanded the room, quietly, effortlessly, irreversibly. Friday was just the beginning, I said evenly. I didn't come for chaos. I came for clarity. He swallowed hard. You owned the week. Every move I made was anticipated. Every contact, every client, every shipment. I nodded. Foresight isn't talent, Daniel. It's preparation. It's leverage. It's patience. And you underestimated all three. He sat back, a long silence stretching between us. Pride, humiliation, and disbelief battled in his chest. He had been the architect of his own underestimation. By 10 a.m., the board had called an emergency session. Daniel's resignation was requested, not demanded, but politely suggested. Investors, analysts, and internal teams were already aligned with Novacore's operations. The message was clear: leadership was no longer his to enforce, only to witness. He signed the resignation papers quietly, hands trembling. A man who once laughed while firing me on Monday had now handed control to the very person he dismissed. By noon, Novacore officially absorbed Titan Freight's key operations. The announcement was strategic, professional, and undeniable. The media highlighted competence, operational foresight, and leadership, not conflict, not drama. My rise was quiet but absolute. I walked back into the main floor, not with security escorts, not with fanfare, but with the calm acknowledgement of authority. Executives and staff acknowledged me, without needing to speak, without hesitation. Respect was earned, not commanded, and I had built it meticulously. Daniel Mercer's office remained empty, a quiet reminder that power isn't about arrogance, about fear, or even about firing the right person at the right moment. It's about strategy, patience, and recognizing the value of talent before underestimating it. I leaned against the glass conference room wall, overlooking the city skyline. 7 years of being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated had culminated in this quiet, unstoppable shift. I didn't destroy Daniel. I corrected the imbalance. I turned underestimation into inevitability. Sometimes revenge isn't chaos. Sometimes it's evolution. And the man who laughed on Monday? He walked out, humbled, aware of the truth he could no longer deny. The person he had thought replaceable had quietly become irreplaceable. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply built. And when the world looked back, they saw competence, authority, and a strategic mind they could no longer ignore. Because the lesson is simple: underestimate the architect of your own empire, and they will eventually own more than you ever imagined. And here's the final question for you: if someone dismissed you as replaceable, would you wait for revenge, or would you build something so powerful that the world has no choice but to notice you? The end. Thanks for aching.